Sarah Viper Martinez stood at the edge of the tarmac, watching the sleek F-16 Fighting Falcons roar overhead in perfect formation. The thunder of their engines made her heart race, but the snickering behind her brought her crashing back to reality. She was 22 years old, fresh out of the Air Force Academy, and standing barely 5 feet 2 inches tall in her flight boots. "Look at Tiny Martinez," laughed Captain Rick Hoffman, a seasoned pilot with more ego than skill. "She'd need a phone book just to see over the instrument panel." The group of male pilots around him erupted in laughter. "Maybe she should stick to those little Cessnas where she belongs." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes fixed on the aircraft above. She had heard these jokes 1,000 times before. Ever since she was 8 years old and her grandfather took her up in his small Piper Cherokee, aviation had been her entire world. While other girls her age were playing with dolls, Sarah was building model airplanes and studying flight manuals. Her bedroom walls were covered with pictures of fighter jets and legendary pilots like Chuck Yeager and the Tuskegee Airmen. The path to becoming a fighter pilot had been brutal from day one. At the Air Force Academy, she faced constant questioning of her abilities. Instructors would ask if she was sure she wanted to be there, suggesting maybe she should consider a more suitable career field like logistics or intelligence. Her male classmates either ignored her completely or treated her like a novelty item, something cute but not serious. During flight training, the challenges intensified. The physical demands were enormous. The G-forces in high-performance aircraft could be crushing, and many people assumed her small frame was a disadvantage. What they didn't understand was that her size actually worked in her favor. Smaller pilots could handle G-forces better and fit more comfortably in cramped cockpits. But Sarah kept this knowledge to herself, preferring to let her performance do the talking. Her flight instructor, Colonel James Mitchell, was old-school military, gruff, demanding, and skeptical of women in combat roles. During her first training flight in a T-6 Texan trainer aircraft, he pushed her harder than any other student. "Martinez!" he barked through the intercom as they climbed to altitude. "Show me a barrel roll and don't embarrass yourself." Sarah's hands moved smoothly over the controls. She had practiced this maneuver hundreds of times in simulators and smaller aircraft. The T-6 responded beautifully to her touch as she rolled the aircraft through a perfect 360-degree rotation around its longitudinal axis. Her execution was flawless. Smooth entry, steady rate of roll, precise recovery. "Lucky break," Colonel Mitchell muttered when they landed. "Let's see if you can do it again tomorrow without killing us both." But Sarah could do it again. And again. Every maneuver, every emergency procedure, every complex navigation exercise, she nailed them all with precision that surprised even her instructors. Her spatial awareness was exceptional. Her hand-eye coordination nearly perfect, and her ability to remain calm under pressure was remarkable. The other students began to notice, but instead of respect, she earned resentment. "She's trying too hard," they whispered in the locker rooms, "probably getting extra help from the instructors." Some suggested she was only there because of affirmative action policies, not because she belonged. The worst part wasn't the direct insults or crude jokes. It was the subtle exclusion. When the guys planned study groups, they somehow forgot to invite her. When they grabbed beers after difficult training days, she wasn't welcome. They would stop talking when she entered a room, making her feel like an outsider in her own career field. Sarah found solace in the aircraft themselves. Every chance she got, she would volunteer for extra flight time. While her classmates were sleeping in on weekends, she was at the airfield, studying different aircraft systems or helping with maintenance. She learned to love the smell of aviation fuel and the feel of a well-tuned engine vibrating through the airframe. Her dedication caught the attention of Master Sergeant Rodriguez, a veteran crew chief who had worked on military aircraft for over 20 years. He watched this young woman spend hours learning about hydraulic systems and avionics, asking intelligent questions and actually listening to the answers. Most pilots saw maintenance crews as beneath their notice, but Sarah treated everyone with respect and genuine curiosity. "You know," Rodriguez told her one afternoon as they worked on an engine inspection together, "most pilots think they're hot stuff because they can make these birds dance in the sky, but you're different. You understand that flying is about partnership between pilot and machine, pilot and crew, pilot and mission. That's rare." Sarah's technical knowledge began to set her apart from her peers. While they memorized procedures to pass tests, she understood the underlying principles that made everything work. When an instructor posed a complex systems failure scenario during ground school, Sarah would not only identify the problem, but explain why it occurred and offer multiple solutions. This expertise, however, only seemed to irritate her male classmates more. During one particularly challenging simulator session involving multiple system failures, Sarah successfully landed her virtual aircraft while 3 other students crashed. Instead of congratulations, she overheard one of them saying she probably programmed the sim to go easy on her. The breaking point came during advanced formation flying training. Sarah was assigned as wingman to Captain Bradley Stevens, an arrogant pilot who made no secret of his belief that women didn't belong in fighter cockpits. During their pre-flight briefing, he barely acknowledged her presence and gave her instructions as if she were a beginning student pilot, rather than someone who had excelled in every phase of training. "Just try to keep up, Martinez," he said with a condescending smirk. "And don't do anything fancy. Leave the real flying to me." They took off in 2 T-38 Talon jets, sleek supersonic trainers that served as stepping stones to fighter aircraft. Stevens immediately began pushing the envelope, executing aggressive maneuvers clearly intended to overwhelm his wingman. He pulled hard turns without proper radio calls, changed altitudes without warning, and generally violated every rule of safe formation flying. Sarah stayed with him through every maneuver. When he pulled 7 Gs in a climbing turn, she matched him perfectly, maintaining precise formation position despite the crushing force trying to press her into her seat. When he rolled inverted and pulled toward the ground in a split S maneuver, she followed smoothly, never wavering from her assigned position. Stevens grew increasingly frustrated as his attempts to shake his wingwoman failed. Finally, he tried something truly dangerous, a high-speed knife-edge pass just 50 feet above the deck. This maneuver required exceptional skill and was prohibited during training flights. Sarah recognized the danger immediately, but also knew that breaking formation at this point could be catastrophic. She matched his descent toward the ground, rolling her aircraft 90 degrees so that her wings were perpendicular to the earth. Flying knife edge required precise control inputs. Too much rudder would cause a spin, too little would result in a slide toward the ground. Sarah's aircraft held perfect position throughout the entire maneuver, her wingtip seeming to slice through the air just meters from Stevens' cockpit. When they finally climbed back to safe altitude, Stevens was speechless. His dangerous grandstanding had been meant to embarrass and intimidate, but instead had showcased Sarah's superior flying skills. The entire sequence had been recorded by training cameras, and the footage would later become legendary among flight instructors. Upon landing, Stevens stormed off without a word. But Colonel Mitchell was waiting for Sarah as she climbed out of her cockpit. His expression was unreadable as he approached. Sarah braced herself for the lecture about following a lead pilot into unauthorized maneuvers. "Martinez," Colonel Mitchell said quietly, "in 30 years of flight instruction, I've never seen formation flying that precise, especially under those circumstances." He paused, studying her face. "Stevens could have killed you both with that stunt, but you kept your head and flew like a professional. That was either very stupid or very brave." "Sir, I was just doing my job as wingman," Sarah replied calmly. "No." The colonel shook his head. "You were doing something much more difficult. You were proving that you belong here, despite what some people think." He looked toward the hangar where Stevens had disappeared. "Some pilots are naturally gifted. Others work hard to develop skills. You're both gifted and dedicated. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." This conversation marked a turning point in Sarah's training experience. Word of her performance spread through the instructor cadre, and suddenly she was getting opportunities that had been previously denied. She was selected for advanced tactical training, given challenging test pilot assignments, and recommended for accelerated fighter transition programs. But with recognition came increased scrutiny and hostility from some quarters. A group of students, led by Captain Hoffman and supported by Stevens, began spreading rumors about her. They claimed she was getting special treatment, that standards were being lowered to accommodate her, that her success was artificial rather than earned. The rumors reached a crescendo when Sarah was selected for the prestigious F-16 Fighting Falcon training program. Only the top 5% of student pilots earned this assignment, and she was the only woman in her class to be chosen. Instead of celebrating this achievement, her detractors launched a whisper campaign questioning the selection process. "It's all politics," Hoffman told anyone who would listen. "They need to fill their diversity quota, so they're pushing her through regardless of ability. Watch, she'll wash out as soon as she gets to real fighter training." Sarah knew about the rumors, but tried to ignore them. She focused on preparing for the challenges ahead, studying F-16 systems manuals, and talking to experienced Fighting Falcon pilots whenever possible. She knew that her performance in advanced training would either silence her critics or confirm their worst predictions. The night before leaving for F-16 training at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona, Sarah stood alone on the flight line, looking up at the stars. She thought about her grandfather, who had passed away during her second year at the academy. He had never lived to see her earn her pilot's wings, but she could almost hear his voice encouraging her to never give up on her dreams. A shooting star streaked across the desert sky, and Sarah made a silent promise. She would not just succeed in F-16 training, she would excel beyond anyone's expectations. She would prove that skill and determination mattered more than gender or size, or the opinions of small-minded people. She would earn her place among the elite fighter pilots, not because she was a woman, but because she was ready to be the best pilot she could possibly become. As she walked back to her quarters, Sarah didn't know that her journey would eventually lead to a moment when her country would need her unique skills and unwavering dedication. She couldn't foresee the day when all the mockery and doubt would fade away in the face of a crisis that required exactly the kind of pilot she was becoming. All she knew was that tomorrow would bring new challenges, and she was ready to face them with the same determination that had brought her this far. The path ahead would be difficult, filled with obstacles and adversaries who would continue to question her place in the fighter pilot community. But Sarah Martinez had learned something important during her training. She belonged in the sky, and no amount of prejudice or small-minded thinking could change that fundamental truth. The little girl who had once dreamed of flying among the clouds was about to become a warrior of the air, ready to defend her nation with skill, courage, and an unbreakable will to succeed. The Arizona desert sun beat down mercilessly on Luke Air Force Base as Sarah Martinez reported for her first day of F-16 Fighting Falcon training. The heat shimmered off the concrete ramp where rows of the sleek single-engine fighters sat like metallic predators waiting to strike. Each aircraft cost $30 million and represented the pinnacle of modern fighter technology. Sarah's new squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hawk Williams, was a legend in fighter circles. She was one of only 12 women to have flown combat missions in F-16s during Operation Desert Storm, and her reputation for excellence was matched only by her intolerance for anything less than perfection. When Sarah walked into the squadron briefing room for the first time, Hawk was waiting with an expression that revealed nothing about what she thought of the newest student pilot. "Martinez," Hawk said without preamble, I've read your training records. Impressive numbers, but numbers don't mean anything when you're pulling 9 Gs and dodging surface-to-air missiles. This is where we separate the dreamers from the fighters. Are you ready to find out which one you are? Yes, ma'am, Sarah replied crisply. The F-16 training program was a crucible designed to break average pilots and forge exceptional ones. The aircraft itself was a marvel of engineering. A single-seat, single-engine, multi-role fighter capable of speeds exceeding Mach 2 and maneuvers that could push the human body to its absolute limits. Unlike larger aircraft where size might be a disadvantage, the F-16's cramped cockpit actually favored smaller pilots who could reach all the controls comfortably and withstand extreme G-forces more effectively. Sarah's first flight in the Fighting Falcon was a revelation. The moment she felt the afterburner kick in and the aircraft accelerate like a rocket, she knew she had found her true calling. The F-16 responded to her slightest input with lightning precision. When she pulled back on the stick, the nose snapped up instantly. When she rolled into a turn, the aircraft seemed to read her mind and execute exactly what she intended. Her instructor pilot, Major Tom "Razor" Phillips, was initially skeptical. He had trained dozens of F-16 pilots and had developed a sixth sense for identifying those who would succeed versus those who would wash out. Okay, Martinez, let's see what you've got. Show me a vertical climb followed by a barrel roll recovery. Sarah smoothly advanced the throttle to afterburner and pulled the nose vertical. The F-16 climbed like a homesick angel, acceleration pressing her deep into her seat. At the apex of the climb, she rolled inverted and executed a perfect barrel roll, recovering to straight and level flight with textbook precision. Her altitude loss was minimal, her airspeed control exact, and her recovery seamless. Not bad, Major Phillips admitted grudgingly. Let's try something more challenging. Combat air patrol at Angels 20, simulated bogey inbound from the north. Show me an intercept. For the next hour, Major Phillips threw every scenario he could think of at his new student. High-speed intercepts, low-altitude navigation, emergency procedures, air-to-air combat maneuvers. Sarah handled each challenge with growing confidence and skill. Her spatial awareness was exceptional. Her ability to process multiple inputs simultaneously was remarkable, and her stick and rudder skills were among the best he had ever seen. When they finally landed, Major Phillips pulled Sarah aside. I don't know what kind of training you had before you got here, but you're operating at a level I typically see after months of F-16 experience. Your flying is precise, aggressive when it needs to be, and controlled when the situation demands it. If you can maintain this standard, you're going to be one hell of a fighter pilot. Word of Sarah's exceptional performance spread quickly through the squadron, but instead of earning universal respect, her success created a divide among the other student pilots. Some recognized her talent and began treating her as an equal. Others, threatened by her abilities, intensified their efforts to undermine her confidence. Captain Marcus "Bull" Thompson was the loudest voice in the latter group. A former football player from Alabama, Bull embodied every stereotype of the arrogant fighter pilot. He was big, loud, and convinced that women had no place in combat aircraft. During squadron social events, he would regale anyone who would listen with stories about how diversity initiatives were ruining military effectiveness. "You watch," Bull told his drinking buddies one night at the officers' club. "She'll crack under pressure. Women always do. They don't have the killer instinct you need for air-to-air combat. When things get serious, she'll fold like a lawn chair." Bull's opportunity to test his theory came during advanced air-to-air combat training. The exercise involved 2 versus 2 engagements where student pilots would dogfight against experienced instructor pilots flying as adversaries. Sarah was paired with Bull as her wingman against Major Phillips and Captain Lisa "Venom" Carter, a combat veteran who had never lost a training engagement. The briefing was tense. Bull made it clear that he expected Sarah to follow his lead and stay out of the way while he handled the real fighting. "Just try not to get shot down immediately. he told her condescendingly. Leave the heavy lifting to someone who knows what they're doing. When the engagement began, Bull immediately broke tactical discipline by going after both adversaries simultaneously. His aggressive but undisciplined approach left Sarah exposed and forced her to defend against Major Phillips, while Bull chased Captain Carter in what quickly became a 1-versus-1 duel. Sarah found herself alone against an opponent with over 1,000 hours of F-16 combat experience. Major Phillips was relentless. He used every trick in the book to gain an advantage, diving from altitude to build energy, using the sun to mask his position, employing vertical maneuvers to force Sarah into defensive positions. For 10 minutes, Sarah flew the most challenging flight of her life, matching her instructor move for move while maintaining defensive positioning that prevented him from achieving a weapons lock. Meanwhile, Bull's undisciplined attack had played right into Captain Carter's hands. She used his aggression against him, allowing him to overshoot in a turning fight before reversing position and achieving a simulated kill. Bull was out of the fight, leaving Sarah alone against 2 adversary aircraft. The smart tactical decision would have been to disengage and escape. No student pilot was expected to survive a 2-versus-1 engagement against experienced instructors, but something inside Sarah rebelled against the idea of running. She had spent her entire career proving she belonged, and this was her moment to demonstrate that she was more than just competent. She was exceptional. Using the F-16's superior thrust-to-weight ratio, Sarah executed a vertical climb that caught both instructors by surprise. As they tried to follow, she rolled inverted at the top of the climb and dove back down between them, forcing them to choose which direction to turn. The maneuver created confusion and separation, allowing Sarah to engage Captain Carter while Major Phillips was out of position. The ensuing dogfight showcased everything Sarah had learned about energy management and tactical patience. Instead of trying to match Captain Carter's experience with raw aggression, she flew a defensive game plan that conserved energy while waiting for an opportunity. When Captain Carter made a small mistake, pulling too hard in a turn and bleeding off airspeed, Sarah was ready. She reversed into Captain Carter's turn and achieved a perfect weapon lock just as Major Phillips was recovering from his misposition. The radio crackled with Captain Carter's acknowledgement. Viper has the shot. Venom is dead. The call sign stuck immediately. From that moment forward, Sarah Martinez became Viper, a name that reflected her ability to strike precisely when her opponents least expected it. The other students began using the call sign with a mixture of respect and awe. Even Bull, after his humiliating defeat in the same exercise, grudgingly admitted that she had earned the name through skill rather than luck. Lieutenant Colonel Williams called Sarah into her office the next day. "That was exceptional flying yesterday," she said without preamble. "But I want to make sure you understand something. Call signs aren't just nicknames. They're earned through actions that define a pilot's character. Viper suggests someone who is patient, precise, and deadly when the situation requires it. Live up to that name, and you'll go far in this business." The remainder of Sarah's F-16 training passed in a blur of increasingly complex scenarios. She mastered air-to-ground attacks, learned to employ precision-guided munitions, practiced close air support missions, and perfected her skills in multi-threat environments. Each phase of training built upon the previous one, creating layers of expertise that would serve her throughout her career. Her academic performance was equally impressive. Sarah scored in the top 5% on every written examination and demonstrated mastery of complex systems that other students struggled to understand. She studied tactics manuals in her spare time and engaged instructors in detailed discussions about combat employment strategies. By the time graduation approached, Sarah had established herself as the top student in her class. Her flying skills were exceptional, her tactical knowledge was comprehensive, and her leadership potential was obvious to everyone who worked with her. But the recognition came with a price: increased scrutiny from those who remained convinced that her success was somehow artificial. The week before graduation, an anonymous complaint was filed alleging that Sarah had received unauthorized assistance during her training. The complaint suggested that instructors had given her advanced knowledge of test scenarios and that her academic scores were inflated. Although the investigation found no evidence to support these allegations, the mere existence of the complaint created a shadow over her achievements. Sarah learned about the investigation from Lieutenant Colonel Williams, who called her into the office with an expression of barely controlled anger. "Someone in this squadron filed a complaint questioning your integrity and the validity of your performance," Hawk said bluntly. "I want you to know that I've reviewed every aspect of your training personally, and there's absolutely no basis for these accusations. Your success is 100% earned." The knowledge that someone had tried to sabotage her reputation through false accusations was devastating. Sarah had worked harder than anyone else, sacrificed more than her peers, and excelled by every measurable standard. Yet there were still people who refused to accept that a woman could succeed on merit alone. "Ma'am," Sarah said carefully, "is there anything I should do about this?" "Yes," Hawk replied firmly. "Graduate at the top of your class and continue proving them wrong every single day of your career. Don't let small-minded people define your legacy. Let your performance speak for itself." Graduation day arrived with typical Arizona grandeur, blazing sunshine and clear blue skies that stretched to the horizon. Sarah's parents flew in from New Mexico to watch their daughter receive her F-16 qualifications and assignment to an operational fighter squadron. Her grandfather's brother, a World War II bomber pilot, pinned her new wings on her uniform with hands that shook slightly with age and emotion. During the ceremony, Lieutenant Colonel Williams announced that Viper Martinez had graduated #1 in her class and would be assigned to the 421st Fighter Squadron at Hill Air Force Base in Utah. The 421st was known throughout the Air Force for its high operational tempo and demanding standards. It was not an assignment given to pilots who needed additional development. It was reserved for those ready to contribute immediately to combat missions. As Sarah walked across the stage to receive her certificate, she caught sight of Bull Thompson in the audience. He was applauding, and for the first time since she had known him, his expression showed genuine respect rather than condescension. After the ceremony, he approached her with an awkward smile. "Viper," he said, using her call sign with obvious sincerity, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong about you. Wrong about women in fighters. Wrong about what it takes to succeed in this business. You're a hell of a pilot, and I'm proud to have trained alongside you." The apology meant more to Sarah than she expected. Bull's attitude had been representative of a broader mindset within the fighter community, and his recognition of her abilities suggested that change was possible. Perhaps the next generation of female pilots would face fewer obstacles and encounter more support. That evening, as Sarah packed her belongings for the move to Utah, she reflected on her journey from a young girl dreaming of flight to a qualified F-16 pilot ready for operational assignment. The road had been difficult, marked by discrimination, doubt, and constant pressure to prove herself. But each challenge had made her stronger, more determined, and more capable. Her new squadron commander at Hill Air Force Base was Colonel Robert "Ghost" Martinez, no relation despite the shared surname. Ghost had a reputation as a demanding leader who expected excellence from every pilot under his command. His unit was responsible for air defense missions along the western United States, and their aircraft were often scrambled to intercept unknown contacts approaching American airspace. Sarah didn't know it yet, but her assignment to the 421st Fighter Squadron would place her at the center of events that would define her career and prove to the world that the young woman who had been mocked for her small aircraft skills possessed exactly the qualities needed when her nation faced its greatest challenges. The training was over. The real test was about to begin. Hill Air Force Base in Utah sprawled across the desert landscape like a small city dedicated to the art of aerial warfare. The 421st Fighter Squadron occupied a corner of the base where F-16 Fighting Falcons sat in hardened shelters, ready to launch at a moment's notice. These aircraft weren't training jets. They were combat-ready interceptors armed with live missiles and tasked with defending American airspace against any threat that dared to approach. Captain Sarah Viper Martinez arrived at her new squadron on a crisp October morning, her personal belongings packed into a single duffel bag, and her flight gear carefully secured in specialized cases. She had been an F-16 pilot for 8 months now, but this was her first operational assignment, where lives and national security would depend on her skills. Colonel Robert Ghost Martinez stood waiting in the squadron briefing room, his silver hair and weathered face telling the story of 25 years in fighter aircraft. Ghost had earned his call sign during the Gulf War when his ability to appear and disappear from radar screens had become legendary among both allies and enemies. He studied Sarah with calculating eyes as she reported for duty. "Captain Martinez," Ghost said formally, "welcome to the 421st. I've read your training records and they're impressive. But this isn't Luke Air Force Base and we're not playing games here. Every time one of my jets launches, there's a real threat somewhere out there that needs to be stopped. Are you ready for that responsibility?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied without hesitation. Ghost nodded approvingly. "Good. Your flight lead will be Major Patricia Steele Johnson. She's got over 2,000 hours in the Viper and more intercept experience than anyone else in the squadron. Pay attention to everything she tells you, and you might survive your first year here." Major Johnson was waiting in the fighter pilot ready room, a cramped space filled with leather chairs, tactical manuals, and the constant buzz of radio chatter from the control tower. Steele was a compact woman with steel-gray eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Her reputation for precision flying was matched only by her intolerance for mistakes that could get people killed. "So you're the hotshot from Luke," Steele said, looking up from a weather briefing. "I hear you graduated #1 and think you're pretty special. Here's some free advice. Forget everything you think you know about being a fighter pilot. Training scenarios have predictable outcomes and safety nets. Real-world intercepts have unknown aircraft with unknown intentions and zero margin for error. You ready to learn how it really works?" Sarah's introduction to operational flying began with seemingly routine training missions that gradually introduced her to the complexities of real-world air defense. She learned to work with air traffic controllers who were tracking multiple contacts simultaneously, practiced intercepts against aircraft that didn't always cooperate with planned scenarios, and developed the split-second decision-making skills required when lives hung in the balance. Her first real scramble came on a Tuesday afternoon in November. Sarah was sitting in the squadron ready room studying tactical procedures when the klaxon alarm shattered the quiet. "Scramble! Scramble! Unknown contact bearing 270, altitude unknown, not responding to radio calls." Within minutes, Sarah and Steele were strapped into their F-16s and racing down the runway. The unknown aircraft had appeared on radar screens over the Pacific Ocean, flying a direct course toward the California coast. It wasn't responding to air traffic control frequencies, wasn't transmitting any identification codes, and had ignored repeated attempts at radio contact. "Viper, this is your first real intercept." Steele's voice crackled through Sarah's headset as they climbed through 30,000 feet. "Remember your training, but be ready for anything. Unknown aircraft can be anything from lost private pilots to foreign military reconnaissance platforms. Stay alert and follow my lead." The intercept took place over the ocean, 40 miles from the nearest populated area. Sarah's radar locked onto the target, a small twin-engine aircraft flying at 15,000 feet in a straight line toward shore. As they approached, Sarah could see it was a civilian Beechcraft Baron with no visible markings or registration numbers. Steele positioned her F-16 alongside the unknown aircraft and attempted to establish visual contact with the pilot. The Baron's cockpit windows were tinted dark, making it impossible to see inside. The aircraft continued on course, without any acknowledgement of the fighter jets flanking it on either side. "Unknown aircraft, this is the United States Air Force," Steele transmitted on the emergency frequency. "You are approaching restricted airspace. Turn to heading 180 immediately and contact Los Angeles Center on frequency 124.9. There was no response. The Baron maintained course and speed as if the fighters weren't there. Sarah watched through her heads-up display as the aircraft continued toward a major metropolitan area with millions of innocent people. "Control, this is Steele Flight," Major Johnson radioed to the air defense sector. "Unknown contact continues inbound, not responding to instructions. Request guidance for next level of engagement." The response came from NORAD's Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Colorado, where duty officers were monitoring the situation on massive display screens. "Steele Flight, you are authorized to fire warning shots. Use minimum force necessary to gain compliance." Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she watched Steele maneuver her F-16 into position ahead of the Baron. This was no longer a training exercise. Her flight lead was about to fire live ammunition to force an uncooperative aircraft to turn away from populated areas. If the Baron's pilot still refused to comply, the next step would be deadly force to prevent a potential terrorist attack. Steele's M61 Vulcan cannon erupted in a brief burst, sending 20mm shells streaking past the Baron's nose in a visible display of tracer fire. The message was unmistakable: turn away immediately or face the consequences. For several tense seconds, the Baron continued straight ahead. Then suddenly, the aircraft banked sharply to the south and began climbing. The pilot's voice finally came across the radio, shaky with fear and confusion. "Air Force jets, this is November 74 Yankee. Sorry about the radio problems. I'm having electrical failures and couldn't hear your transmissions. Turning away from shore now." The crisis was over, but the experience left Sarah with a profound understanding of the responsibility she carried. Every decision she made in the cockpit could affect thousands of lives. The difference between a successful intercept and a national tragedy often came down to split-second judgments made at 500 miles per hour. Over the following months, Sarah flew dozens of intercept missions. Most were routine: lost private aircraft, foreign airliners with navigation problems, or military exercises that required monitoring. But each mission reinforced her growing reputation as a pilot who could be trusted in high-pressure situations. Her radio calls were calm and professional. Her flying was precise under stress, and her judgment was consistently sound. Colonel Ghost Martinez began assigning her to increasingly complex missions. When a Russian reconnaissance aircraft tested American airspace defenses near Alaska, Sarah was selected to lead a four-ship formation that shadowed the intruder for 6 hours without incident. When a suspected drug-smuggling aircraft refused to land at a designated airfield, Sarah's pursuit forced it down safely without casualties. Her success earned recognition throughout the air defense community, but it also attracted attention from those who remained skeptical of women in combat roles. An article appeared in a military publication questioning whether female pilots had the physical and emotional strength needed for air-to-air combat. The piece suggested that intercept missions should be limited to male pilots who were better suited for aggressive action. Sarah tried to ignore the criticism, but it was impossible to escape entirely. Some pilots in other squadrons made pointed comments about diversity hires when she attended large exercises or conferences. Others questioned whether her success was due to relaxed standards rather than genuine ability. The constant doubt was exhausting, but it also motivated her to maintain the highest possible performance standards. The defining moment of Sarah's career came on a cold February morning when she was spending a rare day off studying for her upgrade to flight lead. The klaxon alarm sounded throughout Hill Air Force Base with unusual urgency. Sarah was already putting on her flight suit when her cell phone rang with a call that would change everything. "Captain Martinez, this is NORAD Operations Center in Cheyenne Mountain." The voice on the phone was calm but urgent. "We have a developing situation that requires immediate response. Multiple unknown contacts have been detected approaching U.S. airspace from several directions simultaneously. This appears to be a coordinated probe of our air defense systems by foreign military aircraft." Sarah's blood ran cold. Coordinated probes were the kind of aggressive action that could escalate into international incidents or even military confrontation. "Sir, I'm not scheduled for duty today. Shouldn't you be calling someone from the current alert crew?" "Negative, Captain. The alert aircraft have already launched to deal with contacts on the East Coast. We need additional interceptors airborne immediately, and you've been specifically requested for this mission. Colonel Martinez recommended you personally for this tasking." Sarah was already running toward the flight line as the conversation continued. "Sir, what exactly am I dealing with out there?" "Multiple fast-moving contacts approaching from the north and west. They're flying in formation and maintaining radio silence. Early assessment suggests these are foreign military reconnaissance aircraft conducting a coordinated intelligence-gathering mission. Your job is to intercept, identify, and escort them away from sensitive airspace." By the time Sarah reached her aircraft, the ground crew had already begun the engine start procedures. She completed her pre-flight checks in record time and was airborne within 12 minutes of the initial alert. As she climbed through the clouds over Utah, additional details came through her secure radio system. "Viper, this is NORAD control. Be advised you are dealing with at least 6 unknown contacts, possibly more. They appear to be operating in coordinated groups and may be testing our response times and capabilities. You'll be working with interceptors from multiple bases, but you're being assigned as on-scene commander due to your experience with complex intercept scenarios." On-scene commander. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. Multiple foreign aircraft were probing American defenses in what appeared to be a carefully planned operation. Fighter jets from bases across the western United States were scrambling to respond, and she had been chosen to coordinate their efforts. Her radar screen began populating with contacts as she reached altitude. 3 aircraft were approaching from the northwest, flying in close formation at high altitude. 2 more were coming from due north, maintaining a course that would take them over sensitive military installations in Montana. A 6th contact was approaching from the southwest, flying alone but at extremely high speed. "All interceptor aircraft. This is Viper with tactical control," Sarah transmitted on the secure frequency. "We have multiple unknowns approaching from 3 directions. Falcon Flight, take the northwest group. Eagle Flight, intercept the northern contacts. I'll handle the single high-speed target from the southwest." The next hour unfolded like a complex chess game played at supersonic speeds. Sarah coordinated intercepts across hundreds of miles of airspace while simultaneously pursuing her own target, an aircraft that was flying faster and higher than anything she had ever encountered. Her F-16 was pushed to its operational limits as she climbed through 45,000 feet in pursuit of a contact that seemed determined to test American response capabilities. When Sarah finally achieved visual contact with her target, she was surprised to find herself looking at a sleek, unmarked aircraft unlike anything in her recognition manuals. The plane was clearly military, but bore no national insignia or identification markings. It was flying at the edge of space, far above normal civilian traffic, in what was obviously a sophisticated intelligence-gathering mission. Unknown aircraft. "This is the United States Air Force," Sarah transmitted on multiple frequencies. "You are approaching restricted airspace. Identify yourself immediately and turn to heading 270. There was no response, but Sarah noticed the mysterious aircraft beginning to turn away from the most sensitive military installations along its route. The pilot was clearly aware of her presence and was responding to the intercept without acknowledging it directly. For the next 30 minutes, Sarah shadowed the unknown aircraft as it conducted what appeared to be a carefully planned reconnaissance mission along the edges of restricted airspace. The plane never actually violated American territorial boundaries, but it collected enormous amounts of information about radar coverage, response times, and intercept procedures. Meanwhile, the other fighter groups were having similar experiences with their targets. The unknown aircraft were clearly operating as part of a coordinated mission designed to probe American air defenses without providing cause for escalation to a shooting war. NORAD control. This is Viper, Sarah radioed as the mysterious aircraft finally turned away toward international airspace. All unknown contacts have been successfully intercepted and are departing the area. Mission appears to have been reconnaissance rather than hostile action. Recommend continued monitoring but no further engagement at this time. The response from Cheyenne Mountain was immediate and unexpected. Outstanding work, Viper. Your coordination of this complex intercept operation prevented what could have been a serious international incident. All participating aircraft are to return to base. Detailed debrief will follow. As Sarah flew back to Hill Air Force Base, she reflected on what had just occurred. The mission had required everything she had learned throughout her career: tactical expertise, calm judgment under pressure, and the ability to coordinate complex operations involving multiple aircraft and agencies. Most importantly, it had required the kind of precise, patient flying that had earned her the call sign Viper during training. When she landed, Colonel Ghost Martinez was waiting on the flight line with an expression of pride and satisfaction. "Captain Martinez," he said as she climbed down from her cockpit, "NORAD operations called personally to commend your performance today. They said your coordination of that intercept was textbook perfect and that your judgment prevented what could have been a very complicated international situation." Word of Sarah's performance during the coordinated intercept mission spread rapidly through military aviation circles. The mission had been complex, high stakes, and executed flawlessly under her tactical control. For the first time in her career, the recognition she received was based purely on mission accomplishment rather than her status as a female pilot breaking barriers. The phone call that came 3 days later would cement her reputation forever. "Captain Martinez, this is General Patricia Stone at NORAD headquarters. I wanted to personally thank you for your exceptional performance during the recent intercept mission. Your tactical leadership and flying skills were exactly what the situation required." "Thank you, ma'am," Sarah replied, still processing the fact that a 2-star general was calling her personally. "Captain, there's something else. We've been watching your career development, and we believe you have the potential for much greater responsibilities. How would you feel about an assignment to our elite intercept unit here at Cheyenne Mountain? It would mean promotion to major and command of your own flight within 6 months." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Assignment to NORAD's elite unit was the pinnacle of an intercept pilot's career. It meant working with the most advanced aircraft and weapon systems in the world, defending North American airspace against the most sophisticated threats imaginable. "General, I would be honored to accept that assignment," Sarah said without hesitation. Later that evening, as Sarah sat in her small apartment overlooking the Utah mountains, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a young girl dreaming of flight to a fighter pilot entrusted with defending her nation's airspace, she had overcome every obstacle placed in her path through determination, skill, and an unwavering belief in herself. The mockery and discrimination she had faced early in her career seemed like distant memories now. Those who had questioned her abilities based on her size or gender had been proven wrong by objective performance measures that couldn't be argued with or explained away. She had earned her place among the elite fighter pilots not because she was a woman, but because she was an exceptional pilot who happened to be a woman. Tomorrow, would bring new challenges and greater responsibilities. The elite unit at NORAD would push her skills to even higher levels and place her at the very front lines of national defense. But Sarah was ready. She had proven to herself and to the world that excellence knew no gender, and that the little girl who had once been mocked for her dreams of flight had become exactly the kind of warrior her country needed. The phone rang again, interrupting her thoughts. This time it was her parents, calling to congratulate her on the promotion they had just heard about through military channels. As Sarah listened to the pride and joy in their voices, she realized that this moment wasn't just a personal victory. It was proof that barriers could be broken, that prejudice could be overcome, and that dreams pursued with enough determination could become reality. Outside her window, the lights of Hill Air Force Base twinkled in the darkness, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of F-16s returning from a training mission. Soon she would be flying even more advanced aircraft on even more critical missions. But tonight, Sarah Viper Martinez simply smiled and knew that she had finally truly arrived.